I'd like to welcome the panelists today for this discussion, and I'd like to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. Go ahead, Christine.
I'm Christine Anderson. I was trying to think of all the things you wanted us to include in this, and I guess a little bit of educational background. I have my degree in physical therapy and own a small business doing wellness and functional movement education with patients. But I also have a degree in psychology, which has come so in handy working with people and goes along with my interests in the human mind and the brain and how that all works. I love to travel and read a lot about neuroscience. Yes, I am a nerd. I will own that. Trying to think what else would be information. I am an information junkie, insatiably curious.
That's good.
All right.
You want to know anything else?
Yeah, well, I guess I will go next if that's okay then. I am Mike Barnet, and I live in Washington State. Up here I have a production company, and we produce television and online content for clients up here in the Seattle market. I am a father, and I've been married for many years. And I'm grateful and excited to be part of this conversation. Yeah, so thank you for having me.
I'm Nicole Cottrell, and I have a degree in political science that I don't use currently, like so many of us, but I'm a writer and speaker. I've gone to start a local women's ministry with Renee, where we serve women in assisting them in their Christ-given identities. And my primary job, though, is that of a homeschool mom. I have 3 children that I'm home with, age 13, 11, and 8. They keep me quite busy. My background, though, I think too, in terms of this conversation, is I am biracial. I have a Black dad and a white mom. And I was also raised by a white police officer who is my stepfather. So I have some, unique perspective. I hope to be able to discuss too in this conversation, and I'm also really thankful to be here.
My name is Josiah Igono, and I'm excited to be here as well. My background is in industrial and organizational psychology and performance psychology. I've been married to my beautiful wife, Erin, for 10 years. We have 3 kids. For me, my mission statement has largely been that I wanted to challenge athletes mentally, to encourage them spiritually, and to train them physically. And so I'm excited to be a part of this conversation that I believe it is much needed. So I'm excited to be here. And thank you to Renee for setting this up for us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Earl Lee. I'm currently located in Phoenix, Arizona. Renee and I are colleagues. I use they, them pronouns. I am originally from Jamaica, came here 12 and a half years ago to attend college, and I've lived in 7 states. I've traveled a lot around this country, and just have seen a lot of different things happen. Mostly I've lived in the Midwest, which is interesting, being from Jamaica, living in the Midwest in a state that was about 2 or 3% Black. And I work in education, and I work there because I believe that my presence is the resistance, and so I'll continue to be there until they decide to remove me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Candice Tolliver. My educational background, I attended U of A, and I got my Bachelor's of Science degree in Family Studies and Human Development, initially looking to maybe work in family therapy, and that didn't happen. I also have my master's degree, just newly master's student in education, and the focus being on educational foundations. I'm currently an educator. I work in adult education right now and teaching GED students. And I teach a GSC success class that helps them get acclimated to being back in the classroom. And I also teach social studies and civics. In the fall, I'll be teaching 7th grade ELA. So that'll be really interesting. I am on leadership team at Harbor Church here in Phoenix, and I'm also founder and workshop facilitator of my business that is called Love, Lead, Transform, which exists to educate, equip, and enable youth in leadership development. I used to teach leadership classes for high school students, and once I left that, I left doing what I loved, and so I started a business doing it. I'm also a mom. I have a 9-year-old son, and he will be 10 this year. And Nicole, like you said, it's busy and fun and lots of learning for me. Fun things I like to do, like to read and dance, eat great food, and spend a lot of time with my loved ones. And I know you asked us about our favorite color, and that question always makes me kind of laugh because I never know, but I have one right now. So I was like, I'm answering this question. My favorite color is coral.
Oh, that's good.
Just really
Nice.
Does anybody else want to? Do you want to chime in with your favorite colors if you missed out on that?
Yeah, I totally forgot about the favorite color question. And, you know, it would probably, like Candice, change depending on the mood that I was in that day. I think it's teal today.
Black is always solid for me.
My favorite color has been the same since I can remember, since I was a little kid. Purple, always purple, all shades of purple. I don't wear it. I don't even have it really in my house, but I love it.
For me, it's anything bright, like any bright color except for green. Something about green just doesn't sit well with me. But yellow, red, blues, purple, pinks, as long as it's bright. And Renee can attest to this. I actually have nothing that's dark colored except for probably this polo I'm currently wearing in my closet.
I'm going to mess the flow up here, Renee, and say I don't know. I honestly do not know the answer to that question.
That's okay, Josiah. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Renee Bahati Klug, and I'm the founder of Culturally Intelligent Training and Consulting. Today, I'm just going to be moderating this discussion and lending some definitions, but I will be muting my mic to center these voices. So in your first question, what I would like to ask of you is, what is your experience as a Black person in the United States? Again, you're representing just yourself and your opinion, not the entire community, and you can choose to pass on answering any one of these questions. So go ahead.
I'm gonna take a stab at this and go first. So being from a different country, and a country that a lot of people there are Black, like, you know, Jamaica is, you know, when I came here to US, I experienced this like awakening of like seeing a lot more white people. And people are always like, oh, like I never had a teacher, a Black teacher until I was like in college. And I was like, oh, I never had a Black teacher in college. And so I went to, even the teacher who taught me African history was a white man. And I'm just like, to me, being Black in America is not, it's not new anymore because I've been here for 12 and a half years. But it felt very different coming from a country where everybody around me, my teachers were Black, the prime minister was Black, the pastor was Black, everybody was Black. And then coming here and realizing that like, you are no longer the majority and people see you very differently. And they don't really care where you're from, they just see you as African American. And so like, I'm very cautious of people who call me African American. Renee and I have had this conversation. I'm not an American yet. But even when I become an American, to me, the lived experience as an African American is not something I can ever own, because there's just so much more to it than just being Black in America. But I recently shared this experience on my Facebook, and to bring it to a more current thing. I know we're going to get to what's going on in the world right now, but I was out I moved into this new apartment complex, and for the past 2.5 months, I've gone for morning walks in the same pattern. Like nothing has changed. I do the same loop for 2.5 months, 5 days a week. And yesterday, I did the same loop, and I ended, and I'm stretching, and a Black car pulls up with 2 older white ladies. One of them gets out the car to ask me a question. I didn't feel threatened. The older white lady, she got out of the car, she asked me her question, I answered the question. But behind me, for the first time ever, I see a Black woman, and she calls to me as I'm about to put my headphones back in. And she's asking me if I'm okay, and if everything is all right in the space that I was in. And again, five days a week, 2.5 months, I've never seen this woman before. And it's like, and I went out this morning again, and I didn't see her this morning. It's like a guardian angel, like in these times in America where we have to be able to check on people. So for me, that's my experience to be Black in America, is like having to recognize that I am Black in America and what it means, and the racial segregation is deeply rooted in this country.
For me, when I saw the question, I was like, wow, no one has ever asked me, what is it like being Black in America? Never, not one time has anyone asked me that question. And so I started to think back, like, well, why hasn't anyone asked me that question? And thinking about growing up, always being around Black people, like as far as like my family, and then, attending schools where I would have some Black teachers, some not, and I am born and raised in South Phoenix. My grandparents lived in South Phoenix. Like, just everyone is in this area for the most part. And so seeing, brown bodies essentially was something that was very normal for me. However, 6th through 12th grade, I attended a school that was primarily, almost all completely Mexican students or Mexican American students. And so my very close friends pretty much were all of them were either Mexican American, and I had one friend who was Guatemalan. I have to say that because she goes crazy, because she's like, everyone here is not Mexican, I'm from Guatemala. So, I always have to put that in there whenever she sees something. She sees this, I challenge her out. But that was my experience, 6th through 12th grade. And I believe there was one friend who was biracial. He was Black, and his mother was Black, father was white, and another young lady, but like initially, that was what I grew up in. And then I had church family. I spent tons of time at church, and I went to a church that was multiracial. So like literally you saw every color, and there were so many biracial children running around. Like we had every single kind of, like, whatever you wanted to create, it was there, And so that was very normal for me. So now that I think about that now, I'm like, this is probably why no one ever really asked me. I grew up in a school where maybe it wasn't like a thing, because you had like one Black friend, and we're really talking about everyone else's, the majority's experience of what it means to be, their race in America, but not really mine, because there's only one of me. And when you're in that, you kind of almost blend in, if that makes sense. I picked up tons from their culture, which I love, and I love today, which is, I'm always wanting to speak Spanish to people, or, listen to music that's in Spanish and eat food. And I love that. And at the same time, I think looking back, it might have been my way of trying to be a part of what was around me, because where else was I going to connect? And actually, I'm a connector. And so there's that. And then, like I said, with church, since you saw every type of different person, it just never was really a conversation. And so when I think about it now, you know, going to the University of Arizona, which when I went there, I think 3% were Black students, I want to say. And that was my first really experience of like, I am Black. Because when I walked on the campus, I basically had like culture shock, essentially. To be 110% honest, I'd never seen so many people in my entire life. Like, it was really, I was like shocked, if that makes sense. And so college is actually where I had made my majority of Black friends, is going to college. And it was interesting because then I learned that there, you know that there's different types of Black people, but then I had Black friends from the South, I had Black friends from the East, and some of them would look at me and be like, there's Black people in Arizona? Like, what? You know? And I'm like, yeah, you know? And so they're kind of looking at me like, this is interesting. I'm looking at them like, I've never experienced this. And so through, you know, undergrad, and now from that time to now going through my master's program, it is now so much more of a conversation. So as I have been more educated, as I have learned more, as I have experienced more, my identity as a Black woman has also expanded, which has been equal parts beautiful and encouraging and empowering, and also at times saddening and, you know, makes me a little angry. So, you know, it's been this walk of like discovering, and at the same time becoming much more aware of what I did not see when I was younger. So
I'll jump in next year. So it's been great to hear, you know, some of the different experiences. For me, my family's Nigerian, and so, you know, there's some differences, inherent differences in my cultural upbringing. I grew up as Candice on the South Side. I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. I saw every color that you ever wanted to see. As I started matriculating through high school and junior high, my classes became more and more white, if you will. I was the only. And as I started, you know, growing, I started seeing myself as the only. I was the only. My best friend growing up was half Black, half white. His father was from Mali. Mother was an American woman. I can honestly say that I have been in many uncomfortable situations when I was the only. And looking back at it, I wonder, you know, was this God's, you know, what was this God's plan for my life? I've experienced, as many on this call, as all on this call, different things that were rooted in ignorance. For me personally, when I see too much of one all the time, I get uncomfortable. My story is not the same as everybody else's. One thing that, in terms of this question that is near and dear to my heart, is I don't like exclusion. I don't like it. And as a Black male growing up, I saw that a lot in different ways, different forms. And so I think that as I start to look at my narrative retrospectively, it doesn't get better as you get older, as we've seen now in the news, as we've seen now with these, you know, different events. Things have to change. And I believe that, you know, the ears, the hearts, and the eyes, the spirits of people, of mankind is ripe, and it's ready for a change, and it's ready for new seeds to be planted. And so I think that America is a great country. I believe that, you know, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen, but that growth can't be substantiated unless those roots are rooted out. Those roots have to be rooted out, and that's going to take work, and it's going to take time. So those are my initial thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm gonna hop in. So my experience, I was adopted, and I was adopted by a white family up here in Seattle, Washington. And so I spent most of my life feeling very biracial. Because of that experience, I clearly know and love being Black, but I also understand that culturally I'm not Black. So for me, it was it's always an adjustment figuring out how I present myself in the world, as a Black American in particular, just because I have my experience isn't shared. However, I'm grateful that I do have family members who are Black, and I do have extended family members, and in my immediate family, that we're all Black. So we have that bond. But I will say overall, I often feel biracial, if that makes sense. And I'm often, growing up, I was that guy. I was the Black guy that they would say, "Hey, I've got a Black friend." That was me, being up here in Seattle. Also, just because of the things I gravitated toward, skateboarding, punk music, and then the instruments that I chose to gravitate toward, that also kind of led more toward me being, again, the only. I feel that it's helped me as a professional now, because I find myself in situations, even now working with television and or larger marketing firms, that I'm the only. And I tend to never want to be an ambassador, and I try not to play that role, but I do understand the severity of being the only. And that's in the back of my mind. So I think I often feel, to sum it up, I think I feel like a man without a country, to be honest, if I'm thinking about it, because there's some things I can gravitate toward on the Black side that like really resonate with me, and it's amazing. But there's aspects that are so foreign, and when it comes on the white side, there are clearly things that feel of comfort to me because that's what I grew up with. But then I also understand the aspects of white culture that are very anti who I am. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll follow Mike, if that's okay, really quickly, just because some of what you shared, I very much relate to. So as I mentioned in the beginning, so my dad is Black, my mom is white. My parents split up when I was pretty young. We lived in different states. And so I spent my time between white suburbia Phoenix, predominantly white, and Culver City, Los Angeles, and South Central Los Angeles, where my grandmother lived, which is obviously predominantly Black neighborhoods. And so I would have this ongoing shift between two worlds my whole childhood. And, to be perfectly honest, when I was younger, I didn't know any different. I mean, that was my experience. And everyone was my family, and everyone loved me. And there wasn't a lot of discussion, really. But once I got a little bit older, my Black family members were, and I'm thankful, they were very proactive in making sure that I was being educated, because they knew that I wasn't in my schools in Phoenix, and I wasn't. So they did things like make sure that I attended classes. I went to the African American Museum of History in Los Angeles, and I did a camp there, and they bought me books, and they introduced me to music and things that I would not have been exposed to at home in Phoenix with my mom. So I think, though, to some of what Mike was expressing, that gap sort of widened as I got older, though, of feeling like I didn't necessarily have a place to belong. I was actually just texting with my dad today, and we were talking about it. And, I had a lot of people, I had a lot of people in the Black community want me to, they really encouraged me to just identify as Black. That was what was actually requested of me. And I never felt comfortable doing that because I loved my white family too. And I didn't know how to brand myself, for lack of a better term, one or the other. And so for a long time, entering college, I actually stopped talking about race outside of a very small group of people. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us who were none of us were white. Everyone was a person of color, Hispanic or biracial or multiracial, those were the only people I talked about it with. They were the only people that were safe. We handed books to each other. We discussed together. But if I met someone in public, and people always had the question, what am I? That's the thing I've always been asked. What are you? Because I have the privilege of hiding my Blackness, right? I don't look Black to most people. And I can say to a white person, I cannot answer the question, or I can let them assume that I'm white. And for a long time, I didn't tell people that I was biracial because I was very tired of answering the questions of where do you belong? Where do you fit in? What do you identify with? What's been your experience? And I was asked what my experience was, because in a weird way, I think being biracial becomes a certain kind of curiosity of people. You're kind of a different kind of specimen. And so the swinging back to the other side was when I started having children, realized the responsibility that I have and carry to be educated and to educate them likewise, and have the conversations that needed to be had in my home. And so I think, like Candice, I've spent the last few years really coming into my identity, my racial identity, more than I ever had. And I'm thankful for that. I had to go through the process of feeling the isolation, though, to get to this point.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to all of that. I grew up in a very multiracial, multi-ethnic family. When we would have family reunions or family, it was like the United Nations decided to get together, and they were all eating. If you wanted really good Cuban chicken or Korean barbecue or just beans and cornbread, you could get it at our gathering. And so I think I grew up with this idea that I couldn't afford not to like anybody because I never knew who I was related to. I would show up at a family gathering and oh, that's your cousin. Okay. Great. All right. But I'm grateful for that now, because it did give me a background of inclusivity. But I also felt the struggle that Nicole and Mike felt of having to go back and forth between the two worlds, and sometimes not feeling accepted by either one. I think there was part of me that resented being categorized. Why do I have to pick a category and stay there? Why are you making that a requirement? So there was that piece of it for me as well. But I'm grateful that my experience has primarily been one of diversity. And that my parents always encouraged that. And even though there were many classrooms where I was the only, and so I can totally relate in that regard, that you do a lot of unintentional education of people. But I don't know that when I was young, I actually minded that, because I was so naturally curious that when people ask me questions about, well, who are you? Or why is your hair curly? Or, why is your skin darker than ours? I assumed they were just being curious. Like I was curious about, well, why is your hair so light? And, why does it do this and not that? Why doesn't it curl up when it gets wet? So maybe that family experience colored my experience as I became an adult. But like you guys, there was this transition, though, to understanding not everyone looks at it this way. Not everyone sees you as an individual. People are going to look at you and see your color first, and then your sex, and then maybe if they can get past all of that, they might see you, if you're lucky. And maybe my heart cry has always been, just see me. Stop getting distracted by all of this stuff, because I don't want to be distracted by your stuff. I just want to know who you are as a person. and maybe that dichotomy, or that struggle that we all have, wanting to be understood as individuals, but not necessarily having that be the first encounter or the first contact point, if that makes sense. There was a lot of, I think, sadness and confusion when I realized that it couldn't just be the way it was in my family. That we couldn't just like, hey, well, why don't you just bring your food and I'll bring my food and it'll be great. Because that was how we solved it in my family. But it's not how it gets solved in America. So I think there was a weight of sadness in that came into the picture for me as I got older and realized that there is an incapability to see beyond the surface sometimes.
Thank you. So everybody is muted because there was some feedback, so this is helpful. But in going off of what Christine just said, we have this idea of identity and the term Black Lives Matter, which of course has become a movement and a hashtag. But just looking at the words Black Lives Matter, what does this mean to you?
You know, when I saw that question, it goes back to what you just said. Their words, Black Lives Matter. And for me, how when people see it now, they see it as, you know, they see it as this movement or this whole thing. To me, their words, Black Lives Matter. And that's what it is, you know. Black lives are important and they matter, and we need to care about them, just very clear and cut, you know. And what I think has been hard for me is the justification of the words, the pushback that you get when you hear the words. And you know, my thought always, it's similar to how Christine was saying, you know, when you grow up in, for me, super like diverse places, you know, I have like this community that I've learned to be around and love, and this community that I've been around and I've loved, and they're all parts of me. And what's so funny is I didn't even think about it, but I'm like, I should probably share this. But I have a stepmom and she is white. She is from Minnesota, and I've known her since I was 4 years old. So she has been in my life like my whole entire life. But even that is so normal for me that it's not something that I feel like I have to like it's not something that gets brought up, you know, like I know that it's there, but it's a regular part of my life. I have 2 siblings who are biracial, but they're my brother and my sister. Like, it's even weird for me if like I introduce her, I'm like, oh, this is my stepmom. I'm like, oh, that's such a weird word, you know, because to me, she has my whole life has been there. And so my whole experience has been that my life has mattered. There's never been a time for me growing up that was ever challenged. Always love. That's what it always was. And so when I hear it, that's what I think back to, is like, your life matters, Candice, you know, and Black people, their lives matter. And so when I hear it, to be honest, I don't necessarily think of a movement. I mean, you know, now we do, but if I were to just see it written in someone's paper or someone's having a conversation, they're like, hey, you know, yeah, you know, Black Lives Matter, then I would just be like, yeah, they do. And so, so far, that's kind of what my experience has been with. But like I said, I think the reason that it is like that is because what I have grown up in, as diverse as it has been, in every community, my life has mattered. Now, as I have grown up and I have learned things about systemic racism, and I've learned, like, as I've become more aware, more educated, stepped into, you know, who I am as a Black woman, and the conversations now that I do have with my non-Black friends, that I have with my friends who are, you know, identify as Latinx or Afro-Latino, or even with my stepmom now there's this new kind of conversation that probably always was there, but was never like, it wasn't a conversation. And I think on one end, like Christine has mentioned, on one end, it helped me so much growing up, being in safe spaces like that. On another end, it almost has made me the unlearning and the relearning was very, very difficult for me. Reading the books, learning just systems and just all of that was difficult. My master's program, I remember we had a book, and like I said, education, but in foundation. So learning, you know, how we got started, and, you know, curriculums and things like that, and our curricula. And what happened for me is I would be so mad, like I could not keep on reading a chapter. And I would email my professor, like, I'm working on this paper, but I am pissed off. Like, I am so mad, you know, that this is here. And so I see the both sides of like, wow, it's great that I was in a way kind of like protected, but around people who valued my life and instilled that in me, that I was valuable. And at the same time, when we look at, you know, times like now, it's been a very hard like learning curve the last, maybe I'm gonna say 5 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was some, like you said, learning and unlearning that had to happen for me to understand it from the perspective of someone who didn't grow up, like you said, in an environment where everything you are is acceptable. But I know when I hear Black Lives Matter, I hear a soul cry. Please see me and see that I matter and that I have value and that I have something to contribute. I have something, please see me as an equal. Please know me and understand me, is how I interpret that. And I think that's everyone's soul cry. So why shouldn't Black Lives Matter? Because they do, because everyone's soul cry is please see me, see past the surfacey stuff that we get caught up in and see me as a person. That's what it means to me when I see those words.
I kind of want to go back to, and I'll answer the Black Lives Matter question, but Nicole's comment earlier about wanting to, having someone feel like people tell her to choose to identify as solely Black, or I'm also biracial as well. And it wasn't until I came to the US that I actually was confronted with learning and relearning that part of my experience. In Jamaica, they call me Black, and like I was Blackanese because I'm Black and Asian, or I'm Blasian, but I didn't really identify that way, I guess. I was just like, and like, I'm Jamaican, like that's who I am. Like I don't really, like there's no Black or white, just, you know, that's it. And I actually went through that a lot in college, because with us Asian or Asian American students, I wasn't Asian enough to sit with them, or the Black students, I wasn't Black enough to sit with them, and I'm just like over here in the corner. But you know, the African students are the ones, and they're wonderful and always accept me, and I appreciate that. But it was just always this like, where do you sit? And so I think for me, when I hear Black Lives Matters, I'm gonna say what I don't hear. What I don't hear is only Black Lives Matter. And I think that is such a hard thing for people to understand sometimes, is that we're not, like, the movement or the words themselves doesn't say only Black Lives Matter. And I'm I've learned this from through different personality inventories I've taken and the way that I operate. I'm very careful in how I craft messages and the things I say and the words that I use, and not something I intentionally think about, but something I just do. And so when I hear people are saying, well, all lives matter, and like, it's not just Black lives that matter, it really annoys me, because like, the words were intentional in how they were used and they were put together. They weren't put together to offend anybody. But if you are offended by it, I think people should stop and take a moment and sit there and say, why am I offended? As Christine says, I just having a soul crying out to hear me. Why am I offended by just 3 words on a paper? Why can't I recognize that the Black body is as important as the white body? Because to me, that's what I hear. what I hear is that this Black body is important and deserves to be here. They have humanity, and I need to respect that body. That's what I hear.
I'll chime in here. Really great discussion. When I hear Black Lives Matter, there's a reason why that term was coined. There's a reason why. Unfortunately, the history in this country has led us to this point where that has to be a reminder for many people. You know, India has its problems and has had its problems with racism. South Africa has had its problems with racism. You know, countries like Brazil has had its problems with racism and caste systems and things like that. And unfortunately, because of the way we've handled these systemic issues, we have to remind people that Black lives do matter. Christine brings up a great point. It's a cry. That's what it is. It's a cry. Beautifully said. It's a soul cry. That's what it is. When you start looking at, you know, two main things I share with my organization here is two main things that people always run to in times of crisis, in times of prosperity, is love and safety. Love and safety, whether that love is psychological, whether it's physical, we always run towards love and safety. And, you know, I shouldn't have to prove to somebody that my life is worthy. You shouldn't have to prove to somebody that your life is worthy. Your life is worthy in and of itself. There's nothing that you have to do to prove to anybody that your life is worthy. The reason, the very fact that you are here means to me means that there is a purpose and there is a significance for your life. So when I'm crying, when somebody's crying, and I don't want to get into, I'm not getting into the political, the socioeconomic, the religious strata that exists when this term comes up. There has been a systematic way of doing things that has involved Black people in this country and worldwide, have you, for a long time. And this is a reminder, right? This is a reminder that no, you know, you should not treat me different because of my skin color. I think I was writing notes. Earl, you said something. Which side do I sit on? What do I sit with my Asian brothers and sisters? Do I sit with my black brothers and sisters? Sadly, man, like for me, in my life, I've sat by myself. I've had to sit by myself. And that sucks. But at the end of the day, you know, we shouldn't have to prove and to cry out that our lives matter and it has worth. We shouldn't have to do that. And the very fact that we are doing that suggests that there is a serious problem. There is a serious problem. And the very fact that people are getting mad because we have to remind is a serious problem. And so when I hear Black Lives Matter, sometimes it's not the words that are said, it's the spirit behind those words. And the spirit behind those words tell the story of so many people that have been forgotten. So many people that have been killed, have been brutalized. So many people that you and I will never hear their name. We will never know who those men and women were. But we get these reminders, these unfortunate reminders, every now and then, right? With one very recently, we get these reminders that, you know what, we do matter. This is a human rights issue. And I don't want to get into a political soapbox here, but racism, to be clear, for those who are listening, racism is not relegated to Black people and white people. It's not. I've seen people who are Asian who are racist and have said racist things. I know people who are Mexican who have said racist things and have racist tendencies. Black people, Asian people, Middle Eastern people. Racism is a human construct, and it is practiced by several people. Unfortunately, in this country, the how it's been manifested has been in the majority one way versus the other. But when I hear Black Lives Matter, to put a bow on that, I hear a cry. Are we listening to the cry? Are we listening to the cry? And what are we doing about it?
Well, I think there's been some wonderful points already made. Josiah, what you're saying really resonates with me, and I think is really some of the points I was wanting to make, the worthiness of just existing, being Black. But it also makes me think of a sketch from the comedian Michael Che, and he was talking about Black Lives Matter and civil rights, and he was like, Black Lives Matter, just matter. Civil rights, just civility, and so I think when I hear Black Lives Matter, I think of you're worthy, and there shouldn't have to be a reason to prove that you're worthy. You're valid because you're alive.
I'll give you a chance. Do you want to say something, or you want to pass on this one? Oh, you're muted.
I don't really feel that I need to add anything to what was shared.
Got it. Okay. Good.
I think I echo the sentiments of what were shared.
Good. We are already 40 minutes into this discussion, but the next thing, thank you so much, by the way, for those very powerful words on what this means to you. In moving to the next point of conversation, which has to do with belonging and why people riot, why people are demanding reform, what does justice look like? I want to bring in the topic of the theory of belonging, which essentially says that when people feel a sense of connectedness, when they feel like they belong to a community, they flourish. And specifically in academic contexts, research has emerged that indicates that belongingness has a different meaning for urban African-American students whose racial group is associated with negative racial stereotypes. Settings alone have the power to signal the degree of threat or safety, like Josiah was saying, an individual will experience. Members of marginalized groups often question their value in mainstream settings, especially in settings in which they have historically experienced discrimination. Now, in another study, this one by Baumeister, it says that rejected people feel upset, of course, over feeling rejected. And this negative effect translates into higher aggression. And so in looking at the theory of belonging and how that impacts people psychologically, interpersonally, and right now with riots, reiterating the question, in discussing these current riots, what is true racial reform and what does true justice look like? You don't have to solve the world's problems in 3.5 minutes, but do your best.
I'd like to actually start with this one. I don't know this study that you quoted, the second study, but I do take a little bit of issue with the word aggression, only because the negative stereotype and discriminatory thinking already exists around Black community, and to be more specific, young Black males being already seen and viewed as hyper violent or angrier, all of those things. So I have just kind of started into some of Ibram Kendi's work and reading Anti-Racist but also Stamped. And he talks about the construct of the need for reform, because he kind of flips it on its head, right? We've historically thought of racism as it starts with the individual. We grow these, dark hearts that projects out into our communities, and our communities reflect that back, and then policy is made that supports that thinking. And what he proposes is actually the flip of that, which is that it's actually policy top, and that the policies that have been put in place, and I'm talking all legislation, right? He talks about economic, obviously criminal justice system, education, healthcare. I mean, all of these areas, the policies are actually put in place to support self-interest, which in most cases is the self-interest of white people. Then that trickles down into our communities and our state level and our local level. Then those policies are then reinforcing the ignorant thinking and racist thinking of the individual. So then it becomes easy for an individual white person to say, all Black people are criminals, because when you filter it all the way back to the top, you see higher incarceration rates of young Black males than anyone else. So when people have been making the comment, I think so wisely, that the system is not broken. The system is operating on all cylinders. The system is doing what it was designed to do. It was designed to support systemic racism and the biases that many of us hold in this country, ultimately. So, I don't have a specific answer to reform. I think that as I'm delving into this and I'm educating myself more, I absolutely believe that individual reform means to make change, right? I believe that individuals are deeply responsible and we carry the onus for making change. I believe that starts with me and my children. That starts with the discussions we have, the books we read, the people we include in our lives, the social circle we expand into, the activism we participate in, and so on. I fully believe in that, but I also am now very much really beginning to understand the need for top-down change, where I think that as a political science major, I've always been hesitant to legislate change personally. And I think as a Christian, I've always been hesitant to want to legislate change. But I do feel when you're talking now about something as deeply rooted, grotesque, and long-standing as the system in this country is, when we're talking about oppressive racism, that it has to be policy reform. That has to be a massive part of what happens in this country. And I'm not going to pretend like I know what that's going to be or how we would do that. But that's kind of where I'm at now as I'm thinking about it more holistically moving forward.
One thing that you said in the beginning, Renee, about theory and belonging, and Nicole, I love what you said, all the good stuff, is I think it reminds me of like being in school. So when you're talking about like the different areas being the different settings and how that is reflected back to you if you're worthy or if you're not. And my example of that, because when you said that, it like hit right on the head there, that for me, it was my hair. And I know that can sometimes sound trivial to people, but representation, and people say it and it can sometimes sound super like cliche or whatever, but like representation matters. What is in your classroom, on your classroom walls, it matters. What you're learning matters, the types of books you're reading and their authors and the author's perspective, it matters. And, I get super excited about it because like I told you, education is like that's where I'm at right now. But I definitely think that growing up, although I was very like friendly and I was very personable and I was able to make friends with anyone, that was a part of like my personality. I still, when I look back now, realize I never really felt like I belonged while I was at school. I learned about, I was learning about my own culture, from my family. And then also, like Mike said, being brought up with white parents, I also learned a lot about white culture, I learned about like my Christian culture, but you spend 8 hours of your day at school, and even more than that, if you're in sports or you're in after school clubs. And when I looked around, I did not see me. And so, you can probably, like I said, I'm not going to speak for all Black women here, but you could probably get a pretty large amount who have had some kind of struggle or awakening through their hair. And for me, you know, that's what it was. I always had my hair braided. So it was like long and I would have like different colors and it was wavy. But inside of myself, I always thought that my hair was ugly. It was not beautiful. It was not good enough. And I did everything in my power to not have my natural hair out. And to be honest, I never knew what it naturally looked like growing out of my head until I was 23 years old. And I didn't learn to love it until I was 24. And I'm 30 now. You know what I mean? And so that whole long time was me really not even belonging, because I didn't, you know, what I was around was just people who didn't have hair like me. And it was uncomfortable. And, you know, it was always, you know, relaxed, straight. And so I was like, that's what it should look like. But there was just always this like inner angst dealing with my natural hair and the microaggressions that come along with that. And so a part of belonging is not having to hear all that extra noise. But I remember one time I had my hair, like my hair out, and I was younger. It was relaxed, but it was like, you know, just straight or whatever. And one of my friends at school had told me, like, she looked at me, she's like, oh, I love your hair so much when it's braided. And I remember thinking to myself, like, but my hair is not braided right now. So why, like, why is this, like, this is not a compliment, you know? But it just was like this consistent, like, reinforcement of like how you show up as yourself. And even then, having relaxed hair for me personally wasn't showing up as myself, but in that, like, you being you is not good enough. It's not wanted. And then tying really, you know, great traits that I had, tying them to whiteness by saying things like, oh, you don't sound Black, or, you know, oh, you're so articulate. Just all of these microaggressions. And it's like, can I be an articulate Black woman? Is that a thing, you know? And sounding white, like what, you know, but people do that all the time. And I think that it consistently just reinforces you not feeling like you belong. And even going, you know, off to college, kind of being looked at a bit like a little weird, being like, well, do you know, what kind of friends do you have? Or I remember showing a picture of my boyfriend when I was in college, and they were like, is he Mexican American? And I'm like, yes. And they were just like Black people do that, you know? So that you get it from literally every angle. You know, I have a biracial son. He's Afro-Latino. That's what he is. And, you know, just instances that are consistently, just pop up that are like, you don't belong in a place. But it goes back to, like Josiah saying, why do we have to? Earl said it. I think all of us said it, like having to choose what that looks like. I can be a Black woman who grew up being raised by a Black mother, a white mother, a Black father, having friends who were Mexican while I'm learning Spanish, right? And like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, they're like, all of this stuff, why is that not seen as I can belong and be that? But when you grow up in structures and in systems that dictate to you what belongs and what doesn't belong, whether you recognize it or not, it's there. And for me as an adult, I now see as a child what I didn't, but I see the effects that it had. And so I think that a lot of people, as they wake up to that, that's how it ties into the whole, like, you know, the what does the racial reform look like? What does justice sound like? Because now it's saying like, hey, like, you had me grow up in this system. Yeah, this isn't okay. So now I'm going to say something, because like Christine said, like Josiah said, you are not hearing me. And what we do when we're not being heard, you know, if you're a parent or you've seen a little kid, when they're not getting what they want, if they feel like you are not paying attention, okay, what you're going to get is a, hi, pay attention to me, you know? And when that trickles into spaces of watching, you know, Black men get killed, when it trickles into places of neighborhoods that are filled with poverty and, you know, schools that don't have resources, now this is messing with livelihood, right? With a child, it might be a crayon or some cereal or a banana, something kind of trivial, but these things aren't trivial. And I think that when you get tired of that, when you are done, then we jump into the space that we are in now. Now, I'm like Nicole, I have no idea what all the answers are, but I do think what it requires is a collective effort. It requires parents to talk to their children and raise them in ways that makes them aware. Don't tell them stuff like, we don't see color, you know? No, we do see color, and we live in a system that sees it. And although I want you to treat people in a way that doesn't depend on that, we live in a system that very much makes that a thing. We need people in office. We need people in classrooms. We need bus drivers. We need, you know what I'm saying? Like, everyone collectively has to figure out, what am I good at? What do I do well? And then how do I stay in that place and say, part of, you know, justice and reform is me bringing it to where I am.
I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to try to make this real quick. So I work for ASU, and so I sit on a lawn with some students, and we're talking about justice, and it was a theater group, and one of the professors who was there is a fellow asked the students, was sharing a story about his grandmother in Cuba and her his grandfather picking up arms against the Cuban government, and asked the students, at what point do we pick up arms against our own country and feel like we have to pick up arms against our own country? And a Black woman said, she doesn't know she needs to pick up arms because her very existence is a resistance to the system. And that was almost 2 years ago now, and that has become my motto. I've been in a lot of conversations with folks about whether or not I should go work at a historically Black college or university. I didn't go to one. I've always been a predominantly or traditionally white institution. And I know no different. But the one thing I know is that my very existence within a system that wasn't built for Black and brown bodies, that wasn't built for LGBTQI individuals, that wasn't built for women, my very existence in a system that was not built for diverse learners is a resistance. And so going to the racial justice, Renee and I facilitated a conversation yesterday with some students, and one of the students brought up Rwanda and their reconciliation that they went through after the Rwanda genocide. And so to me, what justice looks like is that we need to find some way to reconcile the systematic injustice that exists. And no way am I advocating the physical burden down of anything. So I want to be very clear, I'm not advocating for the physical burden down of anything. What I'm advocating is for the metaphorical burning of the system. The system needs to be blown up and rebuilt in a way that allows for all voices to be a part of the conversation. That a collective voice, as Candice says, collective voices, Black, brown, white, no matter what color your skin is, we all need to be a part of a conversation, no matter what your ethnic background is, your race is, your gender identification is, your sexual orientation. There needs to be a conversation. And I think what we're seeing across this country right now, it's not just Black folks out there protesting. There's white people, there's Asians, there's Latinx. Everybody's out there saying this system is broken. I don't think we need racial justice. We need transformational justice.
I'm in real quick. In terms, I think there's some really great points that have been made. Representation does matter. We always see ourselves autobiographically in the story of other people. So when we look at leadership, when we look at things that are happening, where are the people that look like me? Where are the people that had my struggle? We always see ourselves autobiographically in the lives of others. When you talk about a tree, right, and you see fruit on a tree, the fruit on the tree is indicative of what is inside the ground, the roots, right? The roots of apathy, to name a few: apathy, discomfort, exclusion, racism, hatred. Those roots need to be plucked out. They need to be pulled out. That's how you change the system. Not only on the top, but on the bottom as well. A couple of years ago, I was thinking about this whole deal as far as racism in this country. This was a few years ago, and I saw this vision in my head, if you could call it that. And it was a field that was just littered with seeds and these seeds are racism. They're littered with seeds. And when you plant something for not only weeks, but months, but years, decades, right? And you continue to plant and water and nurture it, guess what's going to happen? You are going to have fruit that remains, that abides. And you cannot take a lawnmower, you can't take a weed whacker and just clip it over the top. You can't do it. The same thing, the same concept applies to what we're talking about. It has to be uprooted, and it hurts. It takes time, and it's going to be uncomfortable. This is not a drive-by conversation. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of an opportunity for us to really make some big headway. And guess what? If you don't listen to a child long enough, he's going to throw a temper tantrum. He will throw a temper tantrum. Martin Luther King said that rioting is the language of the what? The unheard. When you don't listen for decades, hundreds of years, when you don't listen, people will respond. And now the world is listening. The country is listening. What are we going to do about it?
Well, friends, you're taking all the words that I want to say. So maybe next time I should go first on one of these things, huh? So well said. But I think when I think about reform, I think there's clearly two ways to approach it. You've got the legal side, laws and legislation that's clearly going to combat racism that's systemic in the system. And that can be something that politically everyone can get behind, but in particular the Black community, we can come with talking points as it comes to relating to our leaders that we elect, and then to getting rid of those who are proving to be racial in the way that they govern over us. So we can be involved in making sure our DAs, who when on a local level, electing DAs are going to understand that aren't going to have racial biases, judges, those type of things, getting those judges out who tend to be more racially biased. So I think coming up with talking points so that are easy to understand and will affect the most change is some way that we can start reform. But I think on the side of maybe there's also the social side or the aspirational side. I think the Black community, we should work to inspire ourselves and start speaking in the manners that we want to be represented so that it becomes a thing, speaking that truth. Again, working in the industry, you're influenced by stories, whether it be marketing or television. It's like you want representation. We've been saying that throughout this conversation. Representation is important. So I think just beyond representation, it's important to see content that inspires us, and I think that's another arm. Like, what are the things that we want as a culture that are going to inspire us for better as we're trying to get racial justice? Is that more business unity? Is that more educational unity? What are those things? So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, one thing that I think all of us are actually talking about in this conversation is that the change that happens in someone's brain when they are able to get out of fight or flight mode and into the part of our brain where compassion and empathy live. It's really hard to do that for another person when you're too comfortable. So part of the reform, what reform looks like, is people have to get uncomfortable because their brain won't even be able to process empathy and compassion until they're uncomfortable. So I think that right there is one of the important functions of the protest, of the I'm in your face and I'm yelling for attention. It allows for that discomfort to happen so that our brains can switch over into that empathy and compassion brain that we all got to be able to operate in. Well, that's just my neuroscience nerd coming out there, but I think it speaks to what we've all been talking about. Like how do we get from this needs to change to this is changing. And that's one of the conduits that must occur. We must get uncomfortable, not just the oppressors, but the oppressed. Somebody's got to get uncomfortable before this changes. And the positive thing I see happening in our country right now is that we're uncomfortable. This is good. We need to be uncomfortable because it's not going to change until we are.
That's how growth happens. That is how growth happens.
Change is almost always, what's that quote where change is almost always a fear of losing control, but it is also the avenue through which change actually happens. And so we can't change this until the discomfort happens, until the dissonance, until the pinch. And maybe some people are just now awakening to the pinch. Maybe some of us have been pinched for a long time, as long as we can remember. But we all have to feel this before it's going to change.
Empathetic even. And so thank you, all of you, Candice and Christine, Nicole, Mike, Earl, and Josiah, for joining me today. I really value your experiences and your stories and your voice. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.